My dad and his new wife tried to take over my house and push me out, so I showed them who's really in charge. So I'm a 26-year-old guy named Jason, and I thought life was finally settling down after a really rough year. My mom passed away unexpectedly last January. It crushed me, but I was determined to keep it together. She had left me her house, our family home, in her will. It was her way of making sure I had a solid start in life. Here's where things start to get weird. About 6 months after my mom's funeral, my dad, Rick, drops a bombshell. He's getting remarried. I mean, the guy barely gave himself time to grieve before he was out there again. But whatever, his life, his choices. What really caught me off guard was that he wanted his new wife, Susan, and her 19-year-old daughter, Brittany, to move into my house. I didn't love the idea, but I figured, hey, it's family, and maybe I could make it work for a while. At first, it was fine. Brittany kept to herself, and Susan was polite enough. But over time, things got uncomfortable. My dad started acting like this wasn't my house anymore. He'd make little comments like, "Well, this is our family's home now," or, "You're lucky we're letting you stay here rent-free." Rent-free? This house was literally mine. The breaking point came last week when Dad sat me down and said, "Jason, I think it's time you moved out. Brittany needs more space to feel at home, and it's not fair to her to live like this." I thought he was joking. "You want me to move out of my own house so Brittany can be more comfortable?" He shrugged, all casual, like it made perfect sense. "She's your sister now, and she needs you to support her. You're an adult. You should be living on your own anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad, the same guy who used to take me fishing and help me with my homework, was kicking me out of my own house. But it gets worse. Later that day, I overheard Brittany talking to Susan in the kitchen. She was complaining about how the house was too old, and how she couldn't wait to convince my dad to renovate it. "Once Jason's gone, we can finally make this place ours," she said, laughing. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were planning to erase every trace of my mom and me from this house. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to take this lying down. If they wanted to play games, fine. But they were about to find out that I could play too. After that conversation, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing around the house, thinking about what to do. Moving out wasn't an option. This was my house. My mom had worked her whole life to make sure I'd have something secure, and I wasn't about to let my dad or his new family take that from me. The next morning, I played it cool. I didn't want them to know I'd overheard anything, so I just went about my day like normal. Brittany gave me her usual fake smile, "Good morning," before taking over the living room to scroll through her phone. Dad and Susan acted like nothing was wrong, chatting over coffee like some perfect sitcom couple. But in my head, I was making a plan. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but one thing was clear. I needed to remind them who owned this house. The first thing I did was dig out my mom's old will. I knew it was somewhere in her office, which I'd left untouched since she passed. Sure enough, I found it in a box labeled "Important Papers." The will spelled it out clearly. The house was mine, no conditions, no fine print. That piece of paper was my trump card. Now, I didn't want to blow everything up just yet. I wanted to take my time, make them squirm a little. So, I started making small moves. First, I locked the thermostat so they couldn't keep blasting the heat all day. Then I put passwords on the Wi-Fi and only gave myself access. By the end of the day, Brittany was whining about how her phone wouldn't connect to the internet, and Susan was stomping around because she couldn't stream her yoga videos. Dad just sighed and said, "Jason, can you fix this?" I shrugged and said, "Oh, I must have forgotten to pay the bill. You know, money's tight since you think I should move out." The look on his face? Priceless. This was only the beginning. Over the next few days, I kept up the act. Every time something went wrong, I'd play dumb or act like it wasn't my problem. The fridge mysteriously stopped being restocked. Funny how that happens when I stop buying groceries. Brittany complained nonstop about having to order takeout, and Susan made a passive-aggressive comment about adults pulling their weight. But the real fireworks started when I put a lock on my bedroom door. My dad actually confronted me about it. "Why are you locking your door? This is a family home, Jason." I laughed. "A family home, that's mine. I figured since you want me gone so bad, I'd start keeping to myself." "Isn't that what you want?" He tried to argue, but I just walked away. Meanwhile, Brittany was throwing tantrums about the thermostat again, claiming the house was freezing. I told her maybe she should start saving for renovations instead of new shoes. She stormed off, slamming her door like a spoiled kid. At this point, I could tell they were getting frustrated. But I wasn't done. Not even close. A couple of days later, I decided to escalate. I was done playing nice. Since the Wi-Fi trick worked so well, I figured it was time to remind everyone exactly whose name was on the utilities. That morning I accidentally shut off the hot water. Dad was the first to notice when he tried to shower before work. He came stomping into the kitchen, dripping wet and wrapped in a towel. "Jason, did you forget to pay the water bill now?" he snapped. I looked up from my coffee and said, "Oh no, I paid it. Must be an issue with the heater. Guess I'll have to call someone, eventually." Brittany came downstairs a few minutes later, whining about not being able to wash her hair. She actually had the nerve to yell at me about it. "Ugh, can you, do one thing right? I need a shower." I shot her a smile. "You're welcome to pay for a plumber if it's such a big deal to you." Dad didn't like that. "Jason, don't be rude. She's your sister now." "Oh, is she? Funny, I don't remember signing up for that." The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could tell Susan wanted to chime in, but she stayed quiet, probably trying to keep up her sweet stepmom act. They thought they could push me out of my own house. Not a chance. This was only the beginning. That evening, I decided to have some fun. I unplugged the TV in the living room and borrowed the remote batteries for something else. Brittany spent hours trying to figure out why the TV wasn't working. "This stupid house is falling apart," she yelled. I walked in, pretending to be concerned. "Weird. Maybe the wiring's bad. Old houses, you know?" Dad gave me a look but didn't say anything. I could tell he was starting to realize something was up, but he didn't want to admit it. Later, when Susan complained about how dark the hallway was, I just nodded. "Oh yeah, one of the bulbs probably went out. You guys should pick up a replacement next time you're out." By the end of the night, the frustration was written all over their faces. They wanted me gone, but they were learning just how uncomfortable I could make things if they stayed. The next morning, I decided to take it up a notch. While everyone was out, I rearranged the furniture in the living room, pushed the couch against the wall, moved the coffee table to the corner, and stacked a few chairs in the hallway. Nothing too wild, just enough to throw them off. When they got home, Brittany walked in first. What the hell? Why does the living room look like this?" I walked out of the kitchen, holding a snack. "Oh, I thought I'd switch things up. You know, it's my house, so I figured I'd try a new vibe." Susan frowned but kept her voice calm. "Jason, we all live here now. Don't you think it's polite to ask before making changes?" I smiled. "Kind of like asking me if I'm okay with being kicked out of my own house." Her face went pale, and Dad stepped in. "All right, enough with the attitude. We're trying to create a home for everyone here." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Funny. You keep saying everyone, but I'm the one being treated like a guest." For once, nobody had a response. I could see the cracks starting to form. They were getting uncomfortable, and I wasn't even close to done. That night I took things further. I reset the kitchen clock to run 15 minutes fast. Nothing crazy, just enough to mess with their schedules. The next morning, Brittany came downstairs yelling, "I'm late for class." She grabbed her stuff and bolted out the door. 15 minutes later, I heard her stomping back in. It wasn't even opened yet. She shouted, glaring at me like it was somehow my fault. Oh, weird, I said with a shrug. Maybe you just need a better alarm. Susan narrowed her eyes at me, but I just smiled and poured myself another cup of coffee. Little things like this wouldn't drive them out immediately, but it was starting to wear them down. And I was just getting warmed up. The next move was reclaiming some of the house for myself. I cleared out the guest bathroom, where Brittany kept all her makeup and hair products, and moved everything into a storage bin. Then I locked the door and hung a sign. Under maintenance. Brittany freaked out as soon as she saw it. Where's all my stuff? Oh, I said casually. I needed the space. You can use the downstairs bathroom for now. But that's so far. She whined. Yeah, tough break, I said, walking past her. Dad tried to say something, but I cut him off. Hey, I'm just making adjustments to my house. Isn't that what you wanted? His mouth opened then closed again. For once, he had nothing to say. By now, the tension in the house was at an all-time high, and I decided to stir the pot a little more. Brittany had this habit of leaving dirty dishes in the sink for days, and Susan always complained about it, but never to Brittany's face. So I made my move. One night after dinner, I piled all of Brittany's dirty plates and cups onto Susan's spot at the table and left a sticky note. Brittany asked you to handle these. Thanks. The next morning, I stayed upstairs and waited. Sure enough, I heard Susan snapping at Brittany in the kitchen. Why am I cleaning up after you? Do you think I'm your maid? Brittany fired back. I didn't tell you to do anything. Maybe Jason's the problem. I smirked as the argument escalated, each blaming the other for the mess. By the time I came down, they weren't even speaking. Dad just sat at the table, rubbing his temples like he regretted every choice he'd made. Perfect. After that argument, the house got real quiet. Susan and Brittany weren't talking much, and Dad seemed on edge. I decided to lean into it. Instead of engaging, I started keeping to myself even more, eating in my room, locking my door, and only coming out when necessary. One night, Dad cornered me in the hallway. Jason, what's going on with you? You're acting like a stranger in your own home. I raised an eyebrow. My home? Funny, didn't you just tell me I should move out so Brittany could be more comfortable? He sighed. Look, this isn't what I wanted. We're trying to build a family here. I leaned in a little. Then maybe you should have thought about your actual family first. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked away, muttering something under his breath. The cracks were getting bigger, and I knew it wouldn't take much more to break them completely. The breaking point came when Susan knocked on my door one evening. She had that fake, sweet smile plastered on her face, the one she always used before asking for something. Jason, she started. I think it's time we have a little talk about the house. I crossed my arms. What about it? Well, she said, stepping inside uninvited. We've been thinking, maybe it's best if Rick and I take over the deed. You know, to make things smoother for the family. I laughed hard. You think I'm just going to hand over the house? That's hilarious. Her smile faded. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. You're clearly unhappy here. Oh, I'm not the one who's unhappy, I said, stepping closer. But if you want to test me, go ahead. Just remember, this house is legally mine, and I can have you out of here faster than you can pack a bag. She blinked, clearly thrown off. That's not necessary. Then stop pretending it is. I snapped. This conversation is over. She backed out of the room, visibly shaken. For the first time, I felt like I was finally in control. The next morning, Susan and Dad were whispering in the kitchen. As I walked by, they stopped talking and acted like nothing was going on. A couple of hours later, Dad knocked on my door. Jason, we've been talking, and we think it's time to bring in a mediator, someone neutral to help us figure this out. I stared at him. A mediator? For what? For the house, he said, avoiding eye contact. I smirked. Sure, Dad. Let's involve someone neutral. I'll just call my lawyer to join the meeting. The color drained from his face. Your lawyer? Yep. I said, closing the door in his face. Let's see how far they really wanted to take this. That night, I casually left a folder labeled legal documents on the dining table. Inside? Just blank papers, but they didn't know that. Brittany spotted it first. What's this? She asked, flipping through the folder. I walked in, pretending to act surprised. Oh, just some paperwork I'm preparing. You know, in case things don't work out here. She froze. Wait, you're not serious, right? I shrugged. We'll see. When Dad got home, Brittany rushed to him, panicking. I heard her whispering something about lawyers and getting kicked out. I smiled to myself, let them sweat. The tension hit its peak the next morning. Dad called a family meeting, which basically meant him, Susan, and Brittany cornering me in the living room. Jason, Dad started, trying to sound calm. This isn't working. We're all miserable, and it's because you won't cooperate. I leaned back in my chair. Cooperate? You mean hand over my house? Susan jumped in. We're just asking you to consider what's best for the family. I laughed. Best for the family? You mean your family, not mine. That's when Brittany snapped. You're just being selfish. Mom and I deserve this house more than you. I stood up, towering over her. Deserve? I legally own this place. You're not entitled to anything here. Dad tried to calm things down, but it was too late. I pointed at the door and said, If you hate it so much, you're welcome to leave. Nobody said a word. They just sat there, stunned. Finally, they were starting to understand. The silence didn't last long. The next day, I made my final play. I handed Dad a copy of Mom's will and highlighted the part that named me the sole owner of the house. Read it carefully, I said, watching his face. He skimmed it, his expression shifting from confusion to guilt. Susan peeked over his shoulder, her face pale. This doesn't change anything, she stammered. We're still family. I smirked. Exactly. And family respects boundaries. Starting now, you have 30 days to move out. Dad looked up, shocked. Jason, you can't be serious. Oh, I am, I said firmly. You wanted me gone, but I'm not the one who doesn't belong here. Brittany stormed upstairs, slamming her door, and Susan started crying. Dad sat in silence, staring at the paper. For the first time in months, I felt peace. My house, my rules, and they were finally getting the message.